Good morning, my friends. Thanks for coming out plein air painting with me today. I'm Julie Swanson Davis for Blick Art Materials, and I'm here this morning at the Walnut Grove Farms here in Knoxville, Illinois. One of my favorite places to visit. Today we're going to be painting the Walnut Grove barn. The barn was built in 1865, so it's an amazing piece of architecture, just beautiful. They just don't make them like this anymore. It's used as a venue now. It's not actually used as a barn in itself, but it's on the National Register of Historic Places. The family here has kept it up, and it's just beautiful. I cannot wait to paint it. So I've shown up earlier than this and done a little bit of preliminary work ahead of time, but I wanted to catch you guys up to what I've done so far. First of all, I've done some sketches. I mean, everybody just wants to dive in and start painting. I feel that, I've done that, but it really is a good idea to do some sketching first off. And my composition's a little different in my sketch. I did the whole barn in my sketch, but that's okay. I just am planning on my composition, planning on the lights and dark areas, the values, but if you want a little faster way to create a composition, I got a couple of tools that I want to show you. First of all, the Gorilla Painter has a composition finder, and I love this tool because it has a sliding window. So the sizes of the panels or canvases or paper, whatever you're working on, are all listed here on the sides. You can slide that to get the exact ratio that you need, and then hold that up and see exactly where your painting is going to be. Now, another very useful tool is this viewfinder here. This is a composition viewfinder, and it's red, so it's going to be a little difficult for me to actually show you what's going on here. I have taken a chalk marker. That's the kind that you put on a chalkboard, a dry erase type marker, so that I'll be able to take this off when I'm done with it. But this is so handy. It's clear, so I can hold it right up and look through it to see what it is that I am painting, and then take the marker, and I close one eye. That's what really helps. And then try to hold it as still as possible and come along and just find my edges and find the dark areas. And with the red, it gives you the value. So you can actually use this tool not just for finding the composition, but throughout the painting process to look and see. It's very handy to see where things are lighter, things are darker, where subtle transitions happen that you don't really catch with the naked eye. So let me put these aside for a moment, and let's go to my panel. So while we were getting set up, I went ahead and used the composition that I found in the viewfinder there, and I made a light grid with my pencil, and then looked at the composition and saw which shapes fall into which squares. Using a grid like this is a real handy, accurate way to find your composition. And then I have a ruler on hand whenever I'm going to do something architectural, because of course straight lines are very, very important when you're doing a building. So I just did my main straight lines to make sure that I've got them proportionate and perspective wise about where I want them before I even get started. So that'll save me some thinking in between. All right, well, I'm looking forward to getting started. It's a beautiful morning out here, a little bit on the cloudy side. I kind of wish that we had a little bit more sunshine, but it sure is beautiful. And any chance that I have to get outside and plein air paint, I am happy with whatever the weather is. All right, so the first thing I am gonna do is start mocking in some of the darkest areas of my composition, and also some of the lightest areas. It's real tempting to just jump right in and start in with some beautiful barn red colors because they are going to be so gorgeous. But without the planning of the windows and the placement of the windows and some of the shadows beneath, it's going to be much more difficult to go backwards and find these areas. Now you're probably hearing a little bit of traffic noise. The farm is off of what is now an interstate highway. When the farm was built and the family came here and homesteaded back in the early 1800s, of course, we didn't have to deal with things like that, but unfortunately today we do. All right, I've got a dark area over here. One of my darkest areas is right down in this corner where the trees, so that's going to be kind of an important connection there. I'm using a hard pastel to start off with and get the dark areas. It almost works like a pastel pencil, so it's easier, has a little bit more of a corner for catching some of the details that I'm seeing here. This is a Richardson. I also have some new pastels that I use for hard pastels, and I don't have a lot of them. I just need basically to mark in values, so I have neutrals. All right, so there's really my darkest areas, and what I want to plan now is where some of my lighter areas are going to go. Some of these windows. I'm not doing any of the details, any of the panes, anything like that, just planning exactly where I'm going to be putting things later on. And of course, I want to save this beautiful white. Now, when I plein air paint, pastels are really one of the favorite things that I like to use. And I'll tell you why. Pastels, one of the things that turns people off about them is the dust that they create. And sometimes when you're in the studio, having that dust is a little bit undesirable. However, when you're outside, you don't worry about it as much. It's going to fall away from the surface that you're working on. And so it's just a much more enjoyable experience to use pastels outside. I don't have to use solvents. So when I'm out here in nature, I don't have to run the risk of perhaps having a spill of something that would kill the grass. And I don't have to mix colors. Now, pastels are not, like I said, mixable like oil colors. However, they are mixable. You can layer them on top of one another. And so I can just kind of look down, find a color, and go with it. I don't necessarily have to mix a color and find that exact color and spend time doing that. So it's a little bit more immediate. And I also don't have brushes to clean out. Okay, so let me just talk a little bit about some of the pastels as I use them. I have a few neutral pastels from a neutral set of mostly grays and browns. And this is a Jack Richardson soft pastel set. I have some Blick half stick pastels over here. This gives me an opportunity to bring a lot of colors along that I can bring twice as many colors in a very small setup such as this. And I have Diana Townsend, a couple of those super soft pastels. I don't use very much of those. Some full sticks that I don't have with my half sticks in Sennelier, Rembrandt, and Blick Artist Pastels. And the tripod is holding a Yugo, New Wave Yugo. This is a medium pochade box that I normally would be used for oil painting because there's a palette that goes in here. Well, I took the palette out, put some foam insert in here. I have some more foam to cover it, and it makes a great little travel pochade box, and I kind of decked it out just for my pastel painting. Let me continue to go while I'm talking here. I need a real warm red for the front of the barn because it's morning, it's facing the east, and there is a very red, warm red up on the top. And you'll notice the color that I'm picking out is really not exactly right, is it? It's a little bit off. But I'm going to show you how to do some adjusting with that. I don't have exactly that color. And what I find when I don't have exactly that color, that means that that color is actually a mix of colors, and I need to find that mixture. But I just want to get some of my main colors in here now so I know how to relate everything else that's going on around to them. This is a Great American Pastel, so it's got a nice square color, great for doing buildings. And then off to the side here, of course, this is a little bit darker because it's out of the light, out of the sunrise. And I'll just go ahead and put that in with a nice dark red. Again, it's off, it's not the exact color. If I'm painting in oils or acrylics right now, I'd be like, oh, I better get some nice cool colors in there before I ruin this. Well, I'm not. In pastels, I can work on it and then come back to it. I'm going down and get a little bit against the fence line there, but I'm not ready to actually do the fence. I'm just doing the bottom line of the barn here. Okay. So now, to try and adjust those colors to get them closer to what I'm actually seeing, let's go first of all over here to the side of the barn. I'm going to use a very neutral gray. It's a very cool gray, a bluish gray. And I've been pastel painting for a little while here, and as I've discovered, neutrals are about one of the most important things that I keep in my kit. Neutral grays, warm and cool, neutral browns. All right, so now that color is getting a lot closer to what it actually is in front of me, to what I'm actually seeing. And if we go up into the front, I need to get to a warm gray, a very warm gray, and just kind of bring that intensity of that color down a bit. Leave a little bit of it there. I'm not going to cover the whole piece, but just by bringing a few strokes here. These are kind of a softer pastel, very soft hand-rolled pastel. Let's just bring down the intensity here. Still don't have that color exactly right, but at least I have more of the hue, the value of where I'm going with it. Okay, so those colors are going to be repeating up here in the cupola. Love that cupola. That is just such a neat addition to that. I've got, this is facing away. The side box of the cupola is facing away from the light, so I'm using the darker red. And I'm going to use for the side that's facing the front, that brighter pink, warmer red. These on the side are a little bit actually of both colors because where it's coming out into the light a little bit more. And if I'm doubting what I'm seeing, I can go back and get that composition finder, take a look through that and see exactly if I'm in the right frame of mind with my values there. And then around the windows, we've got some more of that red. All right, now I'm going to neutralize those things the same way that I did with the large areas. The one beautiful thing about plein air painting on a cloudier day, many of us get disappointed if we don't have that bright sunshine, but my light is not changing nearly as much as it would on a sunny day. On a sunny day, those shadows would be moving and I'd be trying to catch them. I mean, I am still, the light is moving, but it's just not nearly as noticeable on a day like today. All right, so I haven't quite planned out everything that I'm going to be doing here in front. The front part of the barn isn't going to be as important to me as the rest of the barn. So I'm just going to kind of leave that area and I will work the greens and the neutral browns in with that as I progress. Okay, the roof itself is going to be a very neutral color. So I'm not going to concern myself with it quite yet, but let's kind of adjust the sky just a little bit. Today I am working in some very grayish conditions. I started out on a sand colored board, so I don't mind that there are some areas that I leave a little unpainted. And when you are covering a board like this with pastel, it is a painting. People kind of wonder, what's a pastel painting? What's a pastel drawing? Why do we call a pastel painting a pastel painting? And that's why, because it really is going to be exactly a painting, using the same amount of work and amount of colors as if I were doing a painting with oil pastels. Now we got a helicopter coming through to deal with. Don't you love painting outdoors? So as the sky goes towards the sun, I'm using warmer colors, warmer tones. I used a little bit of a yellow actually. And then as I move away from the sun, the sky is actually cooler. Today being a cloudy day, those kind of things aren't as noticeable. They're just things that you kind of know and you kind of go with. And that's all I'm going to do with the sky. It's going to be pretty insignificant along with the rest of the painting. So I'm not going to do too much more to it. Okay, now I've got this big area here with the neutral color as I mentioned on the roof. But if I get out my value finder, I'll notice that because of the way it's sloped, the bottom one is actually facing up a lot more, so it's catching more light. So this is actually going to be a little bit lighter. So I'm going to keep along with my neutral tones here. I don't want to, ooh, that's a little bit darker than I would want. Yeah, that's a little bit better. Jack Richardson, this is a very soft neutral gray. It's okay if I see a little bit of the board showing through with that sand color. I almost never ever start a painting on a white panel anymore because of that. Okay, now these are very similar in value. However, this is a little bit darker. It's facing away a little bit more. It's a little cooler. So I'm actually going to mix in just a little bit of a cool gray now, especially if we get some areas around here. I'm going to blow on this. I might get a face full, so let me go to the side. Okay, and then I'm going to come back up here, paint this section of the roof. This is where it's so nice to have those straight lines ready to just go. There, make it so easy. Okay, so that's fairly warm. I'm going to leave that in comparison, leave that as is. Kind of strengthen the line between them. One question I always had with painting, with pastel painting and painting on location, well, the first question I had is it that much different? Why can't I just do this from a photo? And then I actually went out and did some plein air pastel painting. And you know what? It was so obvious to me right away how much you can see the differences in colors, the differences in values. I understand now. All I can say is you just need to try it. And you saw I just made kind of a scribbly thing that just really didn't make much sense. Well, that's how you blend with pastels, really. It's really just a matter of working layers in together. So I've got 3 different values, but they're all very neutral, very similar on the roof of the barn. Now I'm going to have to repeat some of those on the rooftops of the windows and the cupolas there. So the first question I had was whether or not it's worth it to go plain paint in nature or out, actually. And yes, it is. But the second question I had is, where do you know where to start? How do you know where to start? Well, the best advice that I can give there and that I have learned to do is move around. Every bit of your painting relates to the rest of the painting. So do a little bit over here, a little bit over there, build up your details a little bit at a time. That way, if you don't get something exactly right, you can go back and adjust it. When I first started plein air painting, really, honestly, that's how I paint. Completing an area first, making sure that it's done, and then moving on to a next area. Well, that's one way to paint, and it can work. But what I have found is that if you work all around, that you can make adjustments. And if this color isn't exactly right, or this doesn't make sense anymore, or a lot of times in my case, oh, I did not actually get that composition right because I was in too big of a hurry to paint, then I have more time to go back and make adjustments. Right, I can bring back my hard pastel now and get a few more details in there. Working back and forth between some soft ones and some hard ones. Not using a whole lot of color except for that red. But I do have to address some of the greens in the background. So the trees that are back there are, yes, green, but they're also cooler than any greens that I would find in the foreground. So they're almost a blue, to tell you the truth. And they're picking up colors from the sky, things that are farther away from us. Of course, if you think about photography, they're going to look blurrier. They're not going to be as clear, but they're also going to be cooler and in temperature. And that means when you look at a grove of trees that's more distanced from you, they might look bluish or they might look purplish. They don't necessarily look as green. So I'm going to bring the highlights and the darker areas. I've actually got a very deep teal pastel here for the shadows, and I'm just kind of really loosely marking that in. There again, I want to keep that very important roof connection there. So very loosely doing blues first, and then I'm going to add a little bit of cooler greens on top. I don't want anything that's going to be too light. Here's a nice olive color to give it some green. And there's a viridian over here, like so. It's also very tempting as a pastel painter to get your finger in there and blur things, right? I'm fighting that urge all the time. But it's just not a good idea. And neutralizing now with a warmer gray. Pastels are pigments, and even though they might be non-toxic pigments, they certainly are not things that we want to work into our skin tone, into our skin. And our skin is porous, and when we rub pastels into a canvas, we're also rubbing it into our skin. I got just a little bit of a yellowish color in there that's too bright, so I'm going to neutralize it with a little bit of gray. Just a few little cross marks over the top, and that pushes it back. So I try not to use my finger. I might use a brush at times. I might use a glove or finger caught. This is kind of a fun little thing that I always try to do because that really tells you it's trees back there, just little sky holes that you see. All right, now I'm going to move on and continue to do some details, starting with the front of the barn. The front is getting mostly light, but we do have some shadows happening on the eaves that go around it. And the eaves are white, but no, they're in shadow, so they're going to be a little darker gray. And actually they are catching a little bit of green because they're catching it up from the grass. So I am going to address that with just a little light color of green over the top of it. And then there's a piece of the eave that's actually facing the light, so it's a little bit lighter. So glad that I took the time and did my sketch ahead of time. I used a white, but really it is catching more sunlight than that, so I'm going to warm that up with a little bit of a yellow. And there's just a hint of the shingles that shows through on this side, which also gives us a nice break between it and the sky. So I'm just going to redo that line. Now, moving away from that, the window that I see up at the top also, even though I've created it in a white, it is actually catching more warm sunlight, so I'm warming that up just a bit. And the smaller ones underneath here by adding some yellow over the top of it. The same with the eave that's facing the light. Now let's put a little definition in around those windows. And I'm going to try to stay as loose as possible here. I'm going back to the hard pastels. The hard pastels have that nice edge to them so that I can get, I'm almost kind of sculpting it back into the shape that I want it to be. And I can indicate a few of those vent lines, but I'm not going to draw every single one of them, that's for sure. Trying to keep it a little loose here. Didn't quite get enough color there. So we'll define those shapes a little bit. Ooh, I didn't get the yellow on that now, did I? I forgot about that little guy down there. Okay, now there's a little bit of a barn shadow underneath the eaves here. I've already addressed it with a neutral, but it needs to be a little darker. So I'll bring in the darker red again. Too bright, bring your neutral gray, cooler gray, push it back. Pushing down, bringing back. That's kind of what I'm doing the whole time. Sometimes you have to erase and have to use your finger. Couple horizontal lines. We've got a little shadow underneath this eave. From my viewpoint, I'm not seeing much shadow underneath this. It's there, but I can't see it, so I'm going to ignore that. And the door edge over here. Going to frame up those windows a little bit more with the darker red. Maybe indicate some barn boards like so. Okay, but that looks like a mess, doesn't it? All right, so now I'm going to push back. First of all, I need to have, where I'm indicating the shadow of barn boards, I need to have highlights. So easy to push it back a little bit by bringing back that nice, really warm red tone in the shadow area. I'm going to push it back with some warm or some cool gray, blending at the same time that I'm pushing it back. Okay, and because this is a very warm area, the front of the barn, I'm actually going to take a very light orangish yellow and warm up, just give it a touch of sunshine. A touch of that warmth. Okay, so layer back. I'm getting a little closer to what I'm actually seeing here, but I would like to do a little bit more reddish tone. If I keep my strokes vertical, that visually becomes barn board. Defines the windows a little bit more. I don't want to spend too much more time on this because there's a lot more of the painting to do, and as I mentioned before, we got to move around, do some different areas. But you can kind of see how I've done a hard pastel to mix in a little color, then I take my soft pastel, go over it, pushing forward, pushing backwards. All right, let me get a few more details over here. The window shadows that we're seeing are not going to be bright white like that. They're facing away from the sun, so they need to be a little bit of a cooler, especially up under the eaves. I'm creating a shadow. I edited just a little bit there, moved the door a little further in than it actually is, and I forgot a window over here, so I can still do that. All right, now I need to get some definition up here in the cupola and the eaves. Bringing back that same, this is a very cool gray, but in a very light tone. Such a neat window, isn't it? And then up here, the windows that face away, it's much grayer. Let's get back my dark. Seeing a little bit of the sunlight through there, so let's get the sky color back in just a little bit here to let you know that that's transparent. And same over on this side. We're seeing a little bit. And then we want the side that's facing the sun again to be that nice warm white color there. A little bit more underneath. The cupola edge, we have a little white, but for the most part, that's pretty good. All right, well, I'm just going to do a couple more things here to finish up. I could always take this back in the studio, do a little bit more. I usually do that. Usually when I leave a location, I go back to the studio, I have a photo or something, I might do a little bit more cleanup work with it. This is even a cooler gray along the edge here. The fence, as it goes across here, the fence is going to be a very neutral color. It's warm, it's facing the sun. I can go right over the top of the barn that I've painted very easily and finish up the fence. It's got a little bit of green underneath here. This green's going to be a little brighter for the grass, still in the shadow area, but it is closer. So I'm going to finish up the bottom. I can always lift my panel up and get the bottom so I don't get the teeth. Pull up the top here. Okay, the fence goes all the way across the front of the barn, so I do need to extend this down a little bit. Can't really see it, but there are beautiful stones underneath there at the very base of the barn. This barn, when it was built, used stones, local stones. This is actually a little cooler because it's back behind a little concrete ramp for the animals, of course, to go up. The old-time barns would make it easy for the animals to get in and out. So I'll very quickly give that a very neutral gray, and the grass has grown up over the top, but this grass is catching the sun, so it's going to be a lot lighter. Let me work in a little yellowier, warmer, catching the top, catching the light over the top, and then why not? Let's put a little bit of a yellow. I do see just a lot of warmth off of that. Okay, continuing with my fence, it comes all the way over the top here. That's why I'm not worrying too much about anything that's behind it. Okay, and that needs to have a little bit more warmth because it's facing the sun. So let's see, let's do the uprights first. It's funny because when we were setting up, the owner here was very worried that there was a hose that was going to be in it. And that's the beauty of being a painter, folks, is we get to edit things like that out. You don't have to worry if there's a hose or something awry. Okay, now there'd be a bit more of a dance for me. I would come in and straighten up some of these lines, maybe put in some of the flowers and things like that, a few more details. This is a little strong for me now that I step back and look at it. It looks like it's the main focus of the painting right now, so before that drives me absolutely crazy, I'm going to take a neutralize that. It gives me another chance to show you how to, when things are too strong or too overwhelming, the importance of the neutral colors. And when you're applying neutral colors, just do short little strokes, then step back and see where you're at with it and make sure that you don't push it too far. But I do want to stop at this time and talk to you a little bit about how to get this pastel painting now home, because that's one of the problems and one of the issues with pastels is, of course, they can be smeared. And if you take it home in the car and something gets bumped, you can smear and ruin a good morning's work. I've had it happen to me. So let me say a few things. First of all, you can use a pastel fixative, okay? It's best to do this outside, so it's not a bad thing to actually take it with you in your painting bag. And to fix your pastel, turn it flat. I'm not going to actually do the spraying right now because I'd hate to get it on the camera. But spray so that it's more of an angle. Don't spray straight down like this. Don't create puddles. Be patient with it. Do it in layers. So spray at an angle, spray horizontally, then spray vertically. Let it rest for a few minutes and then come back and spray a second layer. That should be enough to get it home. But then when you do get home, you can even give it a couple more layers. That's one way. But if you don't want to use a fixative or take it with you, I do find you can use some vellum, a sheet of vellum against the surface and some artist tape to actually form it to the back so that it doesn't move, so that the paper actually protects it but doesn't slide around over the top of it. So I would tape it along on the back, on the sides, and on the top. That will help get it home, where you would put it under glass or fix it when you get home. But let me show you a neat new contraption. All right, this is the Panel Porter by Masterpiece. It's like having stretcher bars. They're put together, but if I could hold this up and show you that there's channels, 2 channels on the inside. So I've put these 2 9-inch pieces together, and I have a 12-inch piece, and I slide one panel in, and this is a blank one. I haven't actually used it yet. And then I can take my painted piece, slide it in the second panel, and then screw the top bar on, and it's secure. Well, it will be secured once I get it on there, and really easy to, you could even do 2 pastel paintings because they don't touch each other. So it's real easy to take it home that way. All right. Well, I thank you so much for joining me to paint the beautiful Walnut Grove barn. It was a lot of fun. Any day that I can spend painting, especially outdoors, is a good one. Thank you so much.